This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
The Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
In 2009, Antoine Medley founded the Cornel West Academy for Excellence in Raleigh, North Carolina. In 2011, the Cornel West Academy for Excellence is hosting a conference dealing with the images of African American men during the Obama era. Special guest, Cornel West. And it's Cornel West who will join us in this, the 35th and season finale episode of Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. How you doing today, Brother West?
Oh, buddy, each time I come to North Carolina, it's John Coltrane country. I'm already fired up, man. To sit here and see these precious and priceless young people, we tell you explicitly, we love you, that we're gonna keep track of you, and we want you to stand tall in a great tradition. And I wanna thank Brother Antoine Medley. Give him a hand, all of those who work with him. Give him a hand. He's got that love in him. He's got that service in him, and he's bequeathing it to the younger generation. Antoine, we love you, brother. We love you, those who work with you, your family, and we want to acknowledge his parents, his beloved mother and his father. Give both of them a hand. No Antoine without them. And of course, his magnificent wife, who he paid tribute to early in the luncheon. But we want these young folk to know this is all about the love, you see. Loving wisdom and loving thy neighbor and loving thyself and loving justice. Trying to leave the world just a little better than you found it. That's a great tradition. And I do want to say a quick word about Cahill and Grand Scheme. We want them to know that this music is not ornamental or decorative. It is constitutive of who we are. So we appreciate your music and keeping alive the tradition. We love that. We love that. The brother rapping, the sister singing, and they playing real instruments, y'all. This wasn't no computer machine. They playing the real instruments. I was telling my dear brother that we just dropped the album with my dear brother, lyrical genius Bootsy Collins, just last week, The Funk Capital of the World. And he and I wrote 2 songs together, and it's magnificent. But to be in the studio, this is in Cincinnati, Ohio, where Brother Bootsy's from. His brother Catfish just died. Gary Schreider, who used to wear diapers for the Funkadelics, had just died, so we had George Clinton in there as well. You got Bobby Womack on there, you got Chuck D, Snoop Dogg. I saw the brother wearing Chuck D Fight the Power. Chuck D was on the first record with Snoop, as well as Ice Cube. He got Afro-Cuban music, but what it is it's keeping alive what it means to fall in love with justice and courage, not just money, fame, and property and pleasure. And that's the tradition that we're trying to keep alive. And I see the precious parents of the young folk. Give the parents a hand too, who are here. Give the parents a hand too. Yes, indeed. We salute you. We salute you. We salute you, you precious young folk. Very much so. I know that was a long answer to your question, but I'm going to cut my answers a little shorter. But I just wanted to start on that note because it's true, North Carolina is special. And you all know you got the greatest Christian preacher, the greatest artistic genius of the pulpit. I'm talking about Reverend Gardner Taylor, living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Give him a hand even though he's not here. And Brother Reggie High, who works with him, I don't know whether Brother Reggie made it or not, but Brother Reggie High, who works with him, Brother Tavis Smiley and I come to Raleigh, North Carolina every year, every July for 2.5 days to sit at the feet of the great Gardner Taylor, who was, of course, the mentor for Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others. So North Carolina means much to me, means so much to me. And my mother says hello as well for the Academy. Absolutely.
Well, let's stay with North Carolina for a second, you know, because, you know, when you talk about folks like Gardner Taylor and John Coltrane, and, you know, Thelonious Monk
born
is from North Carolina. You know, folks, someone referenced Shaw University a few minutes ago, and of course Ella Baker, and created SNCC here in North Carolina, in Raleigh, 1960.
Absolutely.
It's a great history.
What a great tradition.
And one of the, some of the young men here, who are named, it's like when you do what Professor West does, right? And you get these endowed chairs and they're named after various people. You're the class of 1943 Princeton professor. And the way that these young men are named as scholars, right? It reproduces that notion. So I'm looking at the young man who was the John Hope Franklin, scholar here at the Cornel West Academy for Excellence. And I was fortunate enough, as I know you probably had many opportunities also, to spend some time, with the legendary historian, who was still on the path, right?
Yes,
until he gave his last breath. Who are some of the people, that as you were coming up, that inspired you to do what you do? I remember the first time I met you, and this goes back about 18 years. And you probably don't remember. You came to speak at a small little school, State University of New York at Fredonia. I hadn't even started a PhD program. I was about to start in the fall. And I picked you up at Buffalo Airport, my little Lou Integra.
Lord.
And we listened to some Rochelle Farrell.
Rochelle Farrell. Ooh, she's underappreciated, I'm telling you.
And I remember talking to you, and you talked about what it meant to live the life of the mind. So who are those folks that inspired you, to live a life of the mind? And talk a little bit about what that means, for these young folks, for folks in the audience, to this idea of living a life of the mind.
I appreciate that question. I mean, for me, I am who I am because somebody loved me and somebody cared for me. So it really begins with Irene and Clifton West. I'm my mama's child and my daddy's kid. I always will be. The highest honor I will ever have is being the second son of Irene and Clifton. And so it begins with that love early on, and then it's connected to Shiloh Baptist Church. Because I did grow up as a gangster, but I underwent transformation. I was washed in the blood. Now I still have, and that's real, I still got gangster proclivities, but the Holy Ghost is holding me together. I had a raw rage because I didn't like the world in which I found myself. There's too much suffering in the world. When I was very, very young, I saw that Sister Linda, who I liked very much, didn't have lunch, and Starvale had extra food. And so I was a bit coercive and made sure that Starvale shared his food with Linda every day. It was a Robin Hood-like sensibility. I was wrong to be coercive, but I did want to make sure that everybody had some food. So I had to change that raw rage into a moral indignation. So I'm on fire for justice, not revenge. I'm a militant for tenderness. And I'm an extremist of love. But what that does is it cuts against the grain, makes you go against the grain, as it were. And once I did go to college, I had been shaped by the Black Panther Party. I heard somebody say Bobby Seale.
Yes.
I just wrote an introduction. Yes, there's our brother. Yes, indeed, indeed. Stand up, brother. Give this brother a hand. Give this brother a hand. Yes, we love you, brother. We love you. But Bobby Seale and Huey Newton and others meant much to me. I couldn't join the party because I'm a Jesus-loving free black man. And they were secular and agnostic. So we disagreed on the God question. But I worked in the breakfast program every morning because I have a love affair, try to have a love affair with people, but I begin with the 25th chapter of Matthew, the least of these. I begin in the prisons. I begin with the poor brothers and sisters catching hell. I begin with folk on the margins, and then it spills over. It gets to rich folk. It just doesn't start there. See, so Wall Street's not a priority for me. Main Street is. I don't hate folk on Wall Street, but I don't start there. But that's what it is for me to be a Christian. Now, what that meant was that by the time I got to Harvard, the first thing I wanted to do was go directly to the breakfast program. So I ran that for 3 years when I was there in Boston. And the prison program, if we ran every Sunday after church. I was superintendent of Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, so we had a lot of interesting material for Sunday school. We read Du Bois. We read Toni Morrison. We read James Baldwin. Somebody was Richard Wright. Who was Richard Wright? Yes, stand up, give that brother a hand. Richard Wright. We read Richard Wright, Native Son, and other classics right in the church, you see. And we played music. I played Curtis Mayfield as beginning every class. So they knew they coming to my Sunday school class, they gonna get some Curtis. Or Gil Scott-Heron. Or the Last Poets. Or Nina Simone, Mississippi, Won't say it in the church. But Mississippi, But it's a way of staying in contact with the best of not just black tradition. This is a profoundly modern tradition, which is so much of the best of the human spirit. And that's very important, and this is crucial for the young folk to understand, that you are being actually grounded and shaped by a tradition. John Coltrane, you talk about John Coltrane, you're not just talking about a Negro genius born in Hamlet, North Carolina. You're talking about one of the heights of the human spirit in the modern world. Monk the same way, you see. And part of the challenge is that these days you got the prison industrial complex, distances from the tradition. You got the entertainment corporate media with weapons of mass distraction, keeping you from the tradition. The military industrial complex, Wall Street financial complex. How are our precious young people going to gain access to the rich tradition? The only way you do it is you got to fight for it. Great labor, service, sacrifice. But the fact is, that's the only way we got access to it. Yeah. It's the only way we got access. Now, of course, those days our families were stronger and our churches were stronger, and our community. Somebody made that point earlier in this wonderful panel that we had. That was a magnificent panel. You all did a wonderful job. But somebody made that point about our communities were stronger. But things have changed. Things have changed. You know, there's no doubt about that. But the fundamental question is, even as pharmacist, lawyer, intellectual, poet, hip-hop artist, whatever, the question is, what kind of care do you really have for others? What's the quality of your service to others? What is the depth of your love to others? That's what greatness is. So you never confuse success and greatness. And part of the problem in the last 40 years that we've told our young people to be successful. Money, fame, property, and they end up well-adjusted to injustice. And the last thing we need are highly successful folk, cold-hearted, mean-spirited, coarse and conscious, but highly successful. We need greatness. Use your success for something bigger than you. That's what greatness is. Whatever gifts that you do have, use it, share it, and give it. But I had great times at Harvard and Princeton, too. Of course, I was blessed to spend time at Union Theological Seminary for 9 years with James Cone,
yeah.
James Washington, Jim Forbes. Now, Jim Forbes, his brother, has a church here named David Forbes. Y'all know that brother? Reverend David Forbes? Yep. What's the name of his church? Christian Faith. He's my dear brother. But James Forbes, one of the great preachers of contemporary Christendom, and his brother has a church, right? I think Gardner Taylor's a member of his church, actually, as well. But North Carolina got a monopoly almost on all of these good folk, I'm telling you. James Forbes grew up in North Carolina as well.
James Brown was your roommate?
Sure. Not James Brown, the funk genius, no, not him. He's my soulmate, but not my roommate. But James Brown, you all know on the television, the sports show.
Sports counselor, yeah.
Yeah, you all know James Brown. He's magnificent. But he was an All-American basketball player. He played professional basketball, too. But he's from Chocolate City, Washington, D.C. And I fell in love with his sister, actually, so it was always a little delicate in the dorm, you know. Sister Alicia, ooh, she's just magnificent, sister. But James and I, we're on tour together, because his book just came out. I recommend you all to buy James Brown's book. It's a powerful text.
And he's national spokesperson for AARP these days, I think, also.
Is that right? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
He's old enough to be James Brown, I got to talk to him about that. I didn't realize that. Good. Yeah, we were roommates. We had a wonderful time. And Sylvester Monroe, who was one of the first black editors of Newsweek, was editor of Ebony for many years. He was there in that same room. Yeah.
So, Brother West, you were on MSNBC a few weeks ago, and you had a disagreement with your brother.
Oh, Brother Al Sharpton.
Al Sharpton.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people were, I want to say, surprised, even shocked by the energy out of that conversation. But, you know, we know that Du Bois and Garvey went at it hard. Right? I mean, brutal, right? Time at the, you know, we know in their own different kinds of ways that, you know, King and Malcolm X went at it hard. You know, Jesse and Farrakhan had their debates. The difference is that, you know, Garvey and Du Bois could have their debate in relative privacy. Black folks reading newspapers, right? It wasn't going to be broadcast to 50 million people on a cable news channel.
Yeah.
But to get to that debate,
I see what indeed.
How important has it been, right? Because, you know, we showed the world that we could elect a black president, but the second part of the question is, how do we help a black president to govern?
Absolutely.
And you can't help the brother govern if you don't hold him accountable, right? And he has to know that he has to be accountable to something, right? So talk about what it's been for you waging, you know, this, let's call it critical warfare, right? You know, how do we hold the first black president accountable the same way that we would have held any other of the 43 men who came before him accountable for responsibility to not black folks, but Americans?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the question. It's it's a complicated one because there's a number of factors to keep in mind. See, I begin with the notion that when you really love people, and in this case, really love black people, and it's to love black people in a white supremacist civilization is a subversive act. It's to cut radically against the grain. And then when you love black poor people, because a part of our problem these days is that we've got a black middle class leadership that doesn't focus as much as it ought on poor black brothers and sisters. Because everybody knows, for example, if white brothers and sisters were going to jail at the same level as black brothers and sisters going to jail, the prison industrial complex would be a national security issue.
Right.
You see.
Right.
But it's also true that if black middle class brothers and sisters were going to jail at the same level as the black poor brothers and sisters going to jail, we'd have a slightly different kind of black leadership. So we got a class bias setting in too. And so we've got to say, no, we come from a tradition where Precious Jamal and Precious Letitia have the same status as our Jack and Jill brothers and sisters.
Right.
Our middle class brothers and sisters. And see, I experienced class mobility. I started off proletariat, ended up middle class. But as a Christian, I cut through it. Because Jamal has exactly the same value for me as Barack Obama. People say, well, you live in a warped world. No, your world's one warped, you see. Because everybody got the same value, especially as a Christian, you see. So that the White House becomes a form of public housing. And the project is a form of public housing. And I want quality in public housing across the board. White House, project, whatever. Now, to look at it in that way means that you're going to generate a lot of attacks and assaults because it's not the normal way of looking at things in our society, in the media, for example. When's the last time you had a serious examination of the prison industrial complex? In the campaign, who even mentioned the fact that 1 out of 3 of our precious black brothers on probation, on parole, or in prison? No mention of it at all.
And our president had an opportunity, right? When your friend and colleague,
Well, Brother Gates.
Brother Gates, right, had a real great opportunity to educate the nation about this reality, right? I mean, that was the thing I felt about Jeremiah Wright. And Jeremiah Wright himself, right, one of the greatest preachers that this country has produced, right, and understood the connection between the gospel and the social gospel, right? We have to have a meaningful relationship with the world that we're in. And so that when folks start coming after Jeremiah Wright for doing what he's been doing for 25 years. 25 years. Effectively, right, what was the responsibility of then candidate Barack Obama? Right, to use that, that bully pulpit to educate the larger nation, right, about the traditions that produce a Jeremiah Wright, right, which is no different than the traditions we see every Saturday in a barber shop, right, when men and women and young boys and young girls amass in these spaces to have critical conversations about the things that matter to us.
Absolutely. I mean, when Jeremiah Wright said, "God damn America," when America kills innocent people, there's nothing wrong with that.
Wait, what's the dispute, right?
Anybody kill innocent people is going to experience some kind of critique and damnation. You see, when Martin Luther King Jr. wrote down the title of his sermon before he was shot down like a dog in Memphis, April 4th, 1968, on that Lorraine Motel balcony, the title of his sermon was "America May Go to Hell." He didn't say it ought to go to hell, it might. It may go to hell. Why? Because if you don't treat your poor people right, if you don't treat your working people right, if you don't treat red people right, you don't treat black people right, you don't treat brown people right, sooner or later, chickens come home to roost. You're gonna reap what you sow. What's in the wash gonna come out in the rinse. You can think you can get away with it for a while, but sooner or later, truth crushed to earth shall rise again. That's what Martin was talking about. You see? So that in that sense, we got to tell our young folk, Martin Luther King Jr. kept the love in what he was saying. But when you love folk, you hate the fact they're being treated unfairly. How many young folk right here love their mamas? Raise your hand, raise your hand. There you go. Now, if somebody treats your mama unfairly, what happens? Do you get upset? Do you get deeply upset? You want to do something about it? Do you keep the love in it? Yes. Keep loving it for your mama. You see? But you hate the injustice. You're not hating the person. You're hating the injustice. You see? And that's the tradition that Martin King was talking about. That's the tradition that Jeremiah Wright represents at his best. But it's difficult when you're a politician, because if you're concerned with the election, you've got to speak to a broader array of people. And in speaking to a broader array of people, it's hard to speak that kind of truth if you want the white moderate vote. It's hard to speak that kind of truth if you want the white independent vote. That's why I say it gets complicated. I mean, I supported Barack Obama. I did 65 events for that brother from Iowa to Ohio because I wanted to make sure that we brought to an end this age of Reaganism with this greed running amok and this indifference to poor people. You know, we spent $325 billion on the prison-industrial complex in the last 25 years, but we told we don't have the money for education, don't have the money for jobs with a living wage, we don't have the money for housing. You say, well, wait a minute, what? No, Martin King talked about what? Warped priorities. Spend $150 billion every month. Well, this year in Afghanistan. But we said we didn't have the money. Spend $1 trillion in Iraq. You said you didn't have the money. But when it comes to poor people, all of a sudden, budgetary deficit. Time to cut back. Wall Street goes under $700 billion welfare. But you just cut off welfare for the poor. Oh, it's welfare for the rich. That's different. They're too big to fail. Also, everyday people too little to rescue.
Amen.
What are we talking about? There's levels of hypocrisy here that need to be pointed out with love. And I keep coming back to the love issue because when I dialogue with Brother Sharpton, and I saw Sister Marjorie here early, and Brother Edward Robinson, who does such a magnificent job here in North Carolina too, especially with the Cornel West theory in the newspaper. We were talking about this, that I was head of the exploratory committee when Brother Al Sharpton ran for president. Now, I knew he wasn't going to win. The brother had a chance of a snowball in hell to win. But you have to redefine winning. Sometimes you win by getting the word out. Or as Monk used to say, sometimes wrong is right.
Right.
When he hit that minor key, everybody else said, no, that's not right. Monk will listen to it. So you got to create your own way. So we decided he was going to run in order to raise the issue of poor people, raise the issue of working people, and raise the issue of black people. And he ran in part connected to a black agenda. My black agenda, we don't mean just special interests of black people. The black freedom struggle has been fundamentally about justice and fairness for all. Right. That's what it is. Frederick Douglass didn't say, I just want freedom for black people. He wanted freedom for everybody, but he was going to begin on the chocolate side of town and spill over to vanilla and spill over to yellow and so forth. Ida B. Wells, in the face of American terrorism called Jim Crow, did she want to terrorize other folk? No. Did she want just black people to be free? No. She wanted rights for everybody. She wanted liberty for everybody. The black freedom movement has always been about justice for everybody, fairness for everybody. That's something we need to keep in mind, because a lot of people think, oh, the black agenda is just about those folk over here in the black section of town. No, you don't understand black history. That's Fox News. You see? That's Fox News. They got their distorted conceptions full of lies and so forth. But it's also CNN. CNN doesn't tell the full truth. MSNBC doesn't tell the full truth. We've got to stay in contact with a tradition that authorizes our reality so that we don't get duped by these little narrow discourses that you get on television all the time. They're so truncated, they're so parochial, they're so provincial. They don't allow the variety of voices that would allow us to get at these deeper issues as it relates to poor people and working people. And that's what, in part, what I was wrestling with Sharp, because I told Sharp, I said, brother, I'm very afraid that you could be used by the White House to hide and conceal some of the suffering of poor people. He said, Brother West, what you mean? I said, well, I know Tim Geithner, who's the treasurer, comes right out of Wall Street, is talking to Brother Barack every day. And I know you coming in every 2 weeks, so you don't have the same kind of input.
Your man, Lawrence Summers.
Right. Larry Summers, absolutely. He's gone now, but he was the major. I mean, Larry Summers, deregulated derivatives, comes right out of the Wall Street oligarchy. Tim Geithner, right out of the Wall Street oligarchy. I said, well, wait a minute, you got Martin Luther King Jr. just bust in the Oval Office. So Martin Luther King Jr. is listening in on your conversation about Wall Street oligarchy and bailing out these Wall Street oligarchs. He just got tears in his eye. Said, I died for sanitation workers. I died for poor folk. I tried to organize poor people. Where's the discussion about poverty? Where is it? And then I told Brother Al, I said, dear Brother Barack Obama gave a State of the Union just in January. First time American president did not refer to poor people or poverty in 48 years in the history of the State of the Union. Something is wrong. I said, you got stop and frisk in New York City. 2/3 of all young black brothers between 16 and 25 have been stopped and frisked by the police. They arrested 2.8% of those who were stopped and frisked. And 7 members of the cabinet comes into New York, don't say a mumbling word, including the president. Well, see, that upsets me. Because stop and frisk is not just a black issue. It's the arbitrary use of power in the name of the law. It's immoral. And all it does is try to intimidate the young black brothers. It tries to somehow make them afraid. They're fearful of confinement, fearful of captivity. And more and more New York, young black folk are leaving New York to go into Connecticut and New Jersey because of that.
Or coming down south.
And some of them coming down south if they got money to buy the ticket. 14% of young black brothers say they don't have 1 penny in reporting on their income. How are they surviving? You betcha they're going underground. Underground economy, you see. And there's no serious focus on this. You see, the focus is on middle class, middle class, middle class. Where's the talk about poor people? Where's the talk about working people? And many people in the middle class discover that they really just working people with a bourgeois identity. Because when they lose their job, they're part of the new poor. And that downward mobility is taking place more and more and more. So they used to talk bad, demonize the poor. Now they discover they broke us the 10 Commandments financially. You see? So there's a need for critical voices. Now it's true that my love for Barack Obama is as profound as it is for these young brothers right here. But just like these young brothers, I want to protect them, I respect them, and I correct them. And Barack Obama needs to be respected, protected, and corrected. All three at the same time. And that's true for each one of us. Because I'm a crack vessel too. I definitely need to be corrected.
We come from a generation, right, as many of the adults
I'm older
here.
than you, though.
Yeah, I understand that, right? But I didn't want to say you were old. So.
Well, I'm old school.
We come from generations in which, part of the mantra was that we didn't air dirty laundry. Right, so when there were difficult discussions in the house, right, they stayed in the house, right. In quite, there was no forum in mainstream culture for us to air those gripes, right. Now we have social media. Now we have these 24-hour cable networks. They're all looking for product, right. So if two black men want to get on television and argue, all these places are more than willing, to provide a space and put a microphone in folks, face in that context. But when we talk about some of the substantive issues, right, particularly around this first black president, there are folks who are quite fearful of being critical of Barack Obama because of that status, right? So on the one hand, right, your critique or a critique from Tavis Smiley or the cat said, Black Agenda Report, right, who've been hitting him hard, from a left critique, right, from a left critique that it's most folks in America have no sense even exist. All right. And when you have everyday folks who are listening to the discussions, right, they're quite fearful of this kind of critique of Barack Obama. So how do we do the work of holding our president accountable, right? And as you mentioned, not just for issues that affect our communities, but a range of issues for folks who are not being represented, but at the same time affirm his value in that position, right? And I think we live now in a culture in which any critique is seen as hate. Right, and something that's derived out of jealousy, right? Even in your context, right? You're hearing folks just like, well, he just upset because he didn't get an invitation to the White House, right? As if the issues you're raising, right?
To the White House. Oh,
right.
Lord have mercy.
So how do we, because we're talking about, right, an advanced democracy now, right? Highly functioning democracy. And in that context, how do everyday folks understand what their role is in holding those folks who govern us accountable, right? Particularly when we can't write checks the way the Koch brothers can.
Yeah, the well-to-do. Yeah,
right.
Well, that's why I keep coming back, not just to the love, keeping the love in it, but being clear about your principles. Can you imagine having a black mayor who doesn't speak directly to the situation of poor folk in the city based on principles? You have to engage in a critique if you're concerned about poor and working people in the city. Same is true with your state. And of course, we all have been highly critical, and rightly so, of Brother Clarence Thomas. How come? The brother sides with the strong against the weak. Exactly. He sides with the powerful against the relatively powerless. That's how he rolls. He's a deeply black conservative brother, and to be conservative is to side with the privileges at the top with hierarchy rather than keeping track of the least of these on the bottom and accountability of those at the top for the bottom. That's the difference between a conservative and a progressive. That's what it is. It could be in relation to patriarchy. The brothers who side with male privilege against the sisters are conservative on patriarchal issues. It's just clear. No, they can't preach in the pulpit. Why? Because God only called men. What are you? A man? Oh, I see. What's in the Bible? Well, a lot of things in the Bible. I notice women are supposed to stay quiet in the church. A lot of black churches get around that one pretty easy. Slaves, be obedient to your masters. We got around that one pretty easily. A conservative is puts a premium on order as opposed to justice, and privileges at the top, supporting hierarchy opposed to accountability of those on the bottom. You see, so that we have black conservatives, we have black centrists, we have black progressives, and we have to be honest about it. We always have, and we always will be. But it cannot be personal. I mean, that's why when somebody says that, well, I'm critical because for personal reasons I can't get an invitation. After doing 65 events for free in the cold, I've never worn a coat, and I did it in Iowa in December. There's no grounds for any kind of personal thing.
Right.
See? Right. And I would do it again if the only alternative was Sarah Palin and John McCain. I mean, you know, what are we talking about here? I mean, if Johnny Mathis is going against Pat Boone, that's fine, but I want Curtis Mayfield. And I love all of them as a Christian, but the point is they're different. They're very different, you see. And so in that regard, we have to be principled in our criticism, but we also have to be relentless in our criticism. Why? Because other groups are putting a whole lot of pressure on Barack Obama. Wall Street, right? You got over 4,000 lobbyists coming at him all the time. Where's the lobbyist for poor people? How come we can't reauthorize the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Act? It's crucial for young people. It needs to be reauthorized every 2.5 years. We've been trying to put pressure to do it. See? Crucial. How come we can't get the Employment Free Choice Act for working people to support collective bargaining stronger? Can't get that support from the administration. Why? Too much pressure on the other side. Huge money, wealth, influence coming at him. And he says, what? I need $1 billion to run the next time. Where's that $1 billion going to come from? And when they give that money, what do you think they're looking for? Looking out for their own interests. So somebody's got to raise their voice. And a number, I think more and more people are going to be raising their voices. There's no doubt about it.
You had already had a very productive scholarly career before you published Race Matters. Race Matters was a different book though, right? This was a book that you wrote in which you wanted everyday folks, right, to be able to engage. And,
right.
and it was seen as the beginning of this period of the black public intellectual, right? Your conversation with Sister Bell Hooks, Breaking Bread, you know, folks like Mike Eric Dyson, you know, all these folks who emerged in this particular period speaking truth to power.
The late, great Manny Marable.
Great Manny Marable, right.
Just died
right.
April 1. Yeah.
And, you know, that place has shifted now, right? So now so much activity is occurring in social media. And we've heard social media referenced a couple of times, you know, today, and not always in positive ways. You know, folks hear Twitter and Facebook, and it's demon culture, right? It's everything that's wrong with America and everything that's wrong with young folks, right? You know, sometimes gets represented in what social media is. But you're on Twitter, and you got 200,000 followers, right? And to put this into some sort of context, right? So that means anytime Cornel West decides to say anything, right, in this particular space, right, 200,000 people have access to it. And you know, the things that I've heard about your presence and the presence of some of our colleagues, Melissa Lacewell Perry, you know, your dear brother Eddie Glaude, Monty Perry, I'm naming all folks in Princeton in this case. Yeah. And the thing that we hear all the time from folks, I'm on Twitter also, follow me at New Black Man. The thing that we hear all the time is that everyday folks are like, well, this is like what it was like when I was taking a Black Studies class in college, right? And so everything has changed now. And how important has it been for you, whether it's being on Twitter or recording musical CDs, or the time that you give to places like the Cornel West Academy for Excellence to speak just for the love of speaking for the people, you know, without an honorarium, any of those kinds of things. Yeah. How important for you has it been for you to always make sure that you find an audience that needs to hear your voice? Right? Now, I imagine you probably speak, 350, 400 times a year.
It's a
You know,
lot,
you're like James Brown and Duke Ellington, right? You know, Duke Ellington and James Brown, you know, were on the road 300 times a year, right? James Brown would do 3 shows a night.
3 shows a night.
And then go into the studio, right, and lay down stuff, you know, that would be classic, like Cold Sweat. Duke Ellington, right, always said that he stayed on the road because that was the only way that he could maintain the tradition. If he wasn't out there performing it for people every night, folks wouldn't have access to that tradition. Talk about what that means for you, you know, whether it's social media or being on the road, you know, at this point in time.
Well, but it is true that the musicians and the preachers have always been the models for me. So I've always considered myself a Jesus-loving blues man in the life of the mind. Those are my 2 roots, the music and the church, where the family at the center. That's what my memoir is really about, Brother West, living and loving out loud. And I've been inspired by those folk who are on the road a lot. So it is true that I do about maybe 220 or so. Lil Wayne does about 301, so I'm still behind that Negro. But I drink less syrup than he does. We love that Negro. We love him. But the challenge is to take what you have to say where people are. Yeah. See, so I've taught in prisons for 32 years, going back to the prison program in college. You see, it could be Garden State, it could be Wagner, it could be maximum security in Trenton. I'm there. Regularly, we set up MA program in Sing Sing for the prisoners to have a college degree, not just an AB, but an MA. And same is true with churches. Where as a Christian, I'm not a called preacher. I'm a lay Christian. But I'm actually asked oftentimes to speak behind the pulpit. And I'm telling them I'm a lay person. God had too much wisdom to call me to preach. I'm called to teach. You see. But you're there in the churches. And similarly, in terms of, I've shifted actually to high schools and junior highs now, to reach more and more young folks. You know. So in that sense, it's very consistent with what Brother Antoine is doing with the young brothers here. Just to, again, like Duke and the others, to keep the tradition alive among the younger folk. You have to go where they are. That's why I made 3 CD albums with Talib Kweli and KRS-One and Raw Digger and would never forget with Prince and so forth, because that's where young folk are. They listen to the music. In the studio with Jill Scott, they listen to Jill Scott. Now it's clear I can't sing. I'm not in there singing. I'm just in there running my mouth. They call it spoken word. That's the honorific description of me just speaking. Or the Terrence Blanchard CD that we did that won the Grand Prix for the greatest jazz album 2009 in France. He had me on there 13 times, spoken word, but he's doing all the music with the fellow jazz musicians. But that's where people are. You go where the people are to keep the tradition alive. You're absolutely right. But for me, then it's just continuous and consistent with what I've always understood myself to be in terms of this.
You have an iPod?
No.
So what do you listen? What do you listen to your music on?
Turntable.
On a record player?
Yeah, I'm old school now. Absolutely.
Well,
I do have a CD player. I just bought one of those BOSEs.
Yeah.
One of those. Y'all ever heard of that, BOSE? Shoot, I hear Bootsy's bass and ways I hadn't heard that thing before.
Let me ask you this then. You know, Gil Scott-Heron's been mentioned a couple of times. He has this great song, right? You know, Can You Call on Lady Day and Can You Call on John Coltrane, right? Who do you call on when Cornel West is weary and tired and needs some spiritual uplift, right? Who's on that record player?
Well, I would have already called on Jesus now. I don't want to get my categories conflated here. The music's not going to save you. The music's going to soothe you. The music's going to empower you. It's going to enable you. But Actually, I'm very old school. I tend to go back to DJ Reynolds and Ron Banks of the Dramatics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I go back to
What you see is what you get.
What you see is what you get. And there's a lot of Ted Mills of Blue Magic and Don McPherson of The Main Ingredient.
Oh.
Yeah, this is real old school, but
That's before Cuba gets brought in.
Before Cuba, Goodings Jr. But that music in the popular vein, of course, is Marvin Gaye and Aretha and Donny Hathaway and then Luther Vandross and Gladys Knight. The Emotions, Sister Wanda from Chicago. These are the ones that help preserve my sanity. And then on the jazz, it's Sonny Rollins and it's Mary Lou Williams, and of course it's Coltrane. We're playing Coltrane during the luncheon. It's Miles. That music is a way of sustaining one and encouraging one. Again, it's not salvific the way Jesus is for me, but it's crucial in that regard. And it's when I'm really down and out, there's one brother I can always go to, James Cleveland. It's either Shirley Caesar or James Cleveland.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of North Carolina, Shirley Caesar.
Oh, that's true. That's true. What is it, South? Is it North? Was she? Is North Carolina?
She's in Raleigh. Yeah, she has her churches in Raleigh.
Oh, that's right. Oh, the genius Shirley. Lord, I was on stage with her one time in South Carolina. That's one of the peaks of my career. That Shirley Caesar, she's something. She's magnificent.
Back in November, you sat down at the New York Public Library and had a public discussion with Sean Carter, AKA Jay-Z, about his new artistic memoir, Decoded.
Jay-Z Decoded.
How are you feeling about hip hop these days? What was it like to sit down and have this, what was really a pretty intense conversation with Jay-Z?
It was. No, Jay-Z's a lyrical genius, there's no doubt about it. I was pushing him because he was preoccupied, he said, with trying to get inside the life of gangsters. And gangsters are human beings, but gangsters also need to be accountable, and we don't want our young folk to be gangsters. We want y'all to be decent, compassionate, intelligent, freedom fighters concerned about other people. Is that right? Is that right, y'all? Yeah, is that right? that makes sense, right? But I was telling Jay-Z, I said, if you listen to Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, he was talking about getting inside the life of a gangster from the vantage point of a freedom fighter. So listen to Freddie's Dead, or any of the other singles. He kept track of the humanity of the gangster, but was critical of the gangster activity. And so I was pushing Jay-Z, saying, are you aspiring to be the kind of person who looks at the world through the lens of the freedom fighter, even as you're trying to get inside the life of the gangster the way Curtis did? And I had brought Harry Belafonte and Lupe Fiasco with me because I wanted both generations. Harry Belafonte, towering figure, freedom fighter, great artist. Lupe Fiasco, young brother, aspiring artist, but already a freedom fighter. You see. So we had Jay-Z kind of sandwiched in, as it were. And Jay-Z was, you know, he's a very, very brilliant brother in so many ways. And the conversation, I thought it was a good one, and I appreciated him asking me to be the interviewer in that regard. I think that contemporary hip hop is, in its dominant form, a very shallow and hollow thing. That it is so obsessed with money, fame, pleasure. It's too sexist in putting down the humanity of sisters of all colors, but especially black and brown sisters. So we have to look for those prophetic voices in hip hop. Now keep in mind that you got the recording industry, the radio industry, and the radio industry all tied together under monopolies. So they're only interested in a certain kind of music for the most part. Right. If you're going to be a counter voice, it's going to be difficult to get a contract. We see the struggle that Brother Lupe had just to get lasers out.
You're not going to hear him on the radio.
You're hardly ever going to hear him on the radio. Right. And so you're going to end up doing your music, either performing in order to sustain yourself financially, or have a job and do it at night. Because there's a fear of telling the truth about black humanity when it comes to music. because people know how crucial music is for sustaining and empowering black people. So if you keep their music thin and shallow and hollow and bubblegum-like, you're going to end up with shallow, hollow, bubblegum-like folk. I tell young folk all the time the qualitative difference between being a body stimulator as opposed to a soul stirrer. See, Sam Cooke came out of the soul stirs because he was stirring your soul. But these days, the music on the surface is just stimulating the body, stimulating the body. It doesn't touch the soul. So when a crisis comes in your life, the music is useless. Wow. When your mama dies, the music is useless. It can't speak to your soul to allow you to overcome this catastrophe that everybody has to confront sooner or later in their life. Lou Rawls comes out of the soul stirs. So when he crossed over, you could feel him still stirring your soul, even though he wasn't singing about Jesus.
Sister Aretha. Right.
Oh, Aretha Franklin, Lord have mercy, she's in the stratosphere all by herself in so many ways. I mean, you got to talk about Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday, to talk about the level of genius of somebody like Aretha Franklin, but she's rooted in Bethel in Detroit, her church, and her genius father, Reverend C.L. Franklin. James Cleveland on the piano. I mean, can you imagine all that in one church? Ooh, and that wasn't a praise team. Oh, we got to make a difference. That was not a praise team, that was a choir. The praise team is qualitatively different than a choir. Praise team is stimulating. The choir, stirring your soul. But you all see the point I'm trying to make in terms of what it means to stir the soul, to touch you at the deepest level so you want to be a different kind of person, a better person, a more loving person, a stronger person. That's the kind of music we need. We don't have a lot of music like that nowadays. I mean, it's a sad thing. Hip-hop, the point that Jay-Z made, hip-hop does not have spaces where there could be a variety of voices singing at the same time in harmony.
Right.
You know what that means? Not to have the discipline to learn how to have your voice fit in with another voice so that it has a collective expression. So you can't get the dramatics. Who's the last group like the dramatics in black musical culture?
Delphonics.
Well, I say Boys and Men.
I mean, that generation, yeah.
But I mean, Boys and Men was an example tied to Babyface. Right. But I mean, it's about gone now. Everybody just on their own.
Maybe Jodeci, right?
Jodeci, well, Mint Condition is still going. I saw now Raheem Devon, who I also was blessed to work with. His album should have been much better. He was the double album. That brother can sing. That's very important to know really how to sing in pitch. You're not just making noises and things. You know, Glenn Jones, Gerald Levert, that's serious singing. That comes from your gut, and you have a mastery of your craft. And that's true for intellectuals have the same challenge. Yeah. But it's true for anything you do in life, you see. And once you lose that, it's just a matter of just being successful, making whatever kind of noise you want. Or somebody like, let's say, Beyonce. She's an interesting case in this regard because Beyonce actually is a talented sister, but she lives in the culture of superficial spectacle. So people are much more concerned with how she looks. That's why she got to change her dress every 3 songs. And Aretha just come out there, her and the microphone for 3 hours. That's all she needs. Because it's just coming from, and I'm not putting Beyonce down because Beyonce is talented. She knows she's not Aretha, but that's not a put down. Nobody's Aretha, you know. But I mean, Beyonce's not Gladys Knight. Beyonce's not Wanda Hutchinson of the emotions. But she is the greatest star of the culture of superficial spectacle. Because in the eyes of many folk, she looks good. And I mean, I ain't gonna argue with that, you know. But I mean, Jill Scott looks good, Angie Stone looks good, to me.
And let's just say you have had a history of being with some quite attractive women. I think the first time I met you, you were probably still with Kathleen Battle, the great opera singer.
Yeah, Kathleen was something. Yeah, Yeah, she's a lovely sister.
Everybody knows the Cornel West style. You know, we're looking at it right now, right? And you've been absolutely consistent with that for decades. In your book, Race Matters, you were very critical of the shoddy dress of black intellectuals. But of course, it's now 2011, and we got young men who sag. And the brothers who sag aren't all necessarily trying to be thugs, right? You know, not at all, right? It's just the uniform of the moment. Absolutely. But we now have dress codes. We have anti-sagging laws. You know, the state of Florida is trying to pass a statewide law that, on the one level, really criminalizes black males, right? You know, in terms of their choice of clothing, right? And it was a brother Renee who talked earlier about, you know, part of our responsibility as adults is to equip our children to be able to effectively switch codes, right? If you outside with your boys sagging is perfectly fine. If you in a classroom, right? If you're going for a job interview, right, you have to switch up. But then we have a situation like our folks down at Morehouse, you know, under the leadership of Robert Franklin, and of course they've installed this dress code that's very explicit about grills in the mouth, about caps, you know, in the classroom, in the cafeteria. Any men who are interested in cross-dressing, so no dressing, I mean, very explicit, right? No dresses, no high heels, no pocketbooks. What's going on at this moment that we seem to be much more interested in containing blackness as something that is respectable, as opposed to allowing blackness to flourish in its diversity?
Yeah, I think part of it is that you got two things happening. One is that we have less people who are fundamentally concerned about freedom and more people who are fundamentally concerned about comfort. And in a situation like that, freedom is reduced to licentiousness. And licentiousness is just doing anything that you like at the moment. See, that's not freedom.
Right.
It's not freedom. In fact, the song Bootsy Collins and I wrote was called Freedom, F-R-E-E-D-U-M-B. Freedom. You see. Now you come out of the 60s, in the face of American terrorism called Jim and Jane Crow, lynching. They like to call it segregation, but we know that's too tame a word. It wasn't just segregation. It was the niggerize of people that keep them so intimidated and scared and deferential to the powers that be that they never want to straighten their backs up and organize and mobilize because they dislike the folk who look like them because they were taught to dislike themselves. So that niggerization was psychic, political, social, and economic across the board. So when people talked about freedom, you already had to be courageous. You had to be willing to die. As Brother Martin King said, you have to have your cemetery clothes on. That's what it was in North Carolina just a few decades ago, right? Everybody running around talking about freedom in the midst of Jim Crow, North Carolina. Shoo, you better be willing to die and make sure you near the cross and the blood. Nowadays, you broke the back of American apartheid, break the back of American terrorism, break the back of Jim Crow and Jane Crow, and you let folk loose, and they figure freedom is just doing anything I want to do. Don't have to obey nobody. Oh no, we notice you obeying the mass media all the time. You're obsessed with your pleasure. Where you get that from? You're obsessed with status. Where you get that from? You didn't learn that from your grandmama. You're putting everybody down. You're cussing folk out. Where you get that from? Got it from my friends. Where'd they get it from? Mass media. Oh, so you're not free? You just got another form of bondage. But you think you're doing what you like. You're not thinking for yourself. You see? Well, for Christians, we should be the freest people in the world because we've got an obedience to an Almighty in the face of mighty power. Ought to be the freest. But very few Christians are that free. They want comfort. They want convenience. They want contentment. They want that blessing in the form of a Lexus rather than that blessing in the form of empowerment to love others. There's a qualitative difference. You see. And so our young folk caught up, you know, within the mass-driven, market-driven culture that we live in find themselves more and more drifting away from the sources that would allow them to be free as opposed to just licentious. Does that make sense to folk at all? I know you all are so patient to be sitting in this heat like this for so long. Good God Almighty. Oh, you're so kind. But Antoine, you are to be saluted, brother. You are to be saluted, I'm telling you. Bring so many people like this on a Saturday afternoon. I'm glad you got the church fans to help you out a little bit. It makes a difference. Absolutely. But you know, Tavis and I were just talking on the Smiling West radio show that we have about that law that you were talking about in Florida.
Yeah.
Just this weekend we were hitting it hard. And see, the worst thing you want to do though is just try to coerce people without giving them a reason, and to try to force people to do something without giving them a context. Because I think it's a wonderful thing that our young people do dressed in such a way that you feel at home with yourself with a style that's not imitating others. Because you don't want to be a copy, you want to be an original. But at the same time, you want to be able to think it through for yourself. See, you're not just going through life because people are coercing you to do it. You think through, say, yeah, Mom gave me these reasons, and that makes a lot of sense. Or it puts a smile on her face, and that smile means something. So I'm going to act this way. That's beautiful. But you have it inside of you. You're not being forced all the time. Because as soon as you get into a context where you're not forced, you go right back into it again. Because you haven't convinced yourself that you ought to be doing it. And that's what we have to convince our young people. Convince them these are the things that ought to be done because they're right, they're moral, and you come from a tradition that has taught you it in such a way that you are convinced that that's the way to flower and flourish.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.